Hi, my name is Victor, and I'm here today to present a critical reflection assignment based on five statements that I agree or disagree. The first statement here that I have is says that in general, you find society to be fair, which I do not agree. I do not find Canadian society to be fair because when looking at Canadian immigration history for the past 150 years, it hasn't been a positive one with racialized group and indigenous people. So when looking back 150 years, we're looking at Indian art, we're looking at the Chinese head tax, we're looking at anti-immigration law against Japanese people and black people. We'll see that it hasn't been a positive one. So when looking at Canadian society, the composition, we're looking at individual level and we're looking at community level. And what we find is that discrimination and racism sentiments still exist against immigrants. So, based on this assessment, I reached a conclusion that Canadian society is not fair. So, an example of this will be let's look at employment, for example, and let's look at the resume element. There, there is a study that was conducted in 2009 titled Why Do Some Employers Prefer to Interview Matthew but not Samir? The study was conducted in Toronto, Vancouver, and Montreal. These are three major cities in Canada that are aware of multiculturalism and diversity. The study conducted more than 7,000 hypothetical resumes that were sent out to managers, hiring managers at different companies. And the study shows that there is 40% chance that a job applicant with an English name will be provided with a second interview than a job applicant with an ethnic background or an ethnic name. 40% chances. So, based on this assessment, I reached to a conclusion that Canadian society is not fair. This brings me to my second statement, and it says that Canada is the best country to live in. Canada is the best country in the world to live in, which I do not agree. Based on my first statement, I established that Canada is not a fair society. So, based on that, Canada is not the best country in the world to live in. Again, when looking at immigration history, Canadian immigration history for the past 150 years, it hasn't been fair. It hasn't been a good one for racialized group and indigenous people. So based on this assessment, I reached to a conclusion that Canada is not the best country in the world to live in. So an example of this will be, let's look at employment, for example. And based on a study that was conducted in 2006 titled Who Drive a Taxi in Canada. This report or the studies was conducted to 255 taxi drivers that has a higher level of education, meaning that they possess a PhD, they earn PhD or a medical degree. So out of the 255 taxi drivers, 200 were immigrants. So 200 immigrants, taxi driver out of the 255 were immigrants. So based on this assessment, I reached to a conclusion that Canada is not the best country in the world to live in. This brings me to my third statement. And it says that everyone has a fair shot at wealth and happiness, which I do not agree. Again, my first statement, I would establish that Canadian society is not fair. Again, when looking at Canadian immigration history for the past 150 years in the employment department, in the education department, we found out it hasn't been fair for racialized group or indigenous. So based on this assessment, I reached to a conclusion that everyone has not a fair shot at wealth and happiness. An example of here, let's take a look at employment. And let's look at earnings element. And we're looking at earning element in regard to gender and race. And history shows that when it comes to earning in terms of gender, there's a huge gap between these two elements. So history shows that a female worker doing the same job as a male worker, the earning between the two of them, there's a huge gap. So the female worker earns less doing the same job as the male worker. History shows that. Again, when it comes to race earnings, so when we're looking back at immigration laws, 150 years for racialized group and indigenous, the earning is not comparable with non-racialized group. And also when we're looking at the intersectionality between race and gender, you will find that the more you intersect, the less probability you have to earn more money. So the more you intersect with race and gender, the more poverty you will feel. So based on this assessment, I concluded that there is not a fair shot at wealth and happiness. This brings me to my fourth statement, and it says that society is set up so that people usually get what they deserve, which I do not agree. Again, based on my first statement, I already established that Canadian society is not fair. So, based on that, I reached to a conclusion that society is not set up so that people usually get what they deserve. So, again, looking at Canadian history, looking at immigration history for the past 150 years, it hasn't been fair to racialized group or indigenous people. So an example would be that there's a study that was conducted in 2008. It shows that over 60% of highly educated immigrant workers, they ended up in a job that did not require the level of education. So based on this assessment, I reached to a conclusion that Canadian society is not set up so that people usually get what they deserve. Lastly, this brings me to my last statement, and it says that people get ahead when they know the right people rather than when they work hard, which I do agree. I do agree with this statement because, again, Canadian society is not fair. So, based on this assessment, I do agree with this statement. And let's look, for example, let's look at employment. And let's look at the promotion element. And history shows that usually people who get promoted are people who are closer to the higher management. It's not based on how hard you work. So usually promotion comes with who do you know. So based on this assessment, I do agree that people get ahead when they know the right person, the right people, rather than working hard. And also we can look at networking. So when it comes to employment and when it comes to your networking abilities, the people you get in touch with. So this is an advantage to get hired first than someone who lack networking abilities. So based on this assessment, I do agree that people get ahead when they know the right person rather than how hard they work. And this brings me to my five statements. And just to recap, is to say that I do not agree with four statements, the first four statements. I do not agree. I only agree with the last statement, the last one. Thank you very much.